Shalom, I am Rabbi Michael Panitz, speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk. Tonight is the beginning of a somber day in the Jewish calendar. This is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. My message for you now is Yom HaShoah 5781. Sadly, more relevant today than yesterday. It is 3/4 of a century since the Allied armies completed the defeat of Nazi Germany. 3/4 of a century since the gas chambers and the crematoria were shut down. In 1945, the world dared to believe that the Nazi menace had been confronted and ended. But the danger of resurgent Nazism is greater today than 50 years ago, and greater than even 5 years ago. Across the world, neo-Nazis have moved from the margins and claimed a place in the mainstream of the political spectrum. What would have been nearly unimaginable not so many years ago is today a fact that in this claim they have succeeded. In America, we can trace the survival of neo-Nazism in some of the anti-communist circles of the Cold War, but the movement was not gathering strength until the past half-decade. I remember having a growing sense of dread that this scourge of humanity was returning on election night, November 2016. Perhaps you remember the speech given that night at a Victory Party rally of the National Policy Institute, a white nationalist organization, by its leader, Richard Spencer. Spencer told the conference crowd of about 200 people, most of whom were young white males, that America belonged to white people. He hailed the election result as a sign that whites were, quote, awakening to their own identity. He excoriated Jews, and he quoted Nazi propaganda. Where he was, that's where his audience was too. At the conclusion of his remarks, he and they raised their right arms in a Nazi salute and chanted, "Heil Trump, Heil the people, Heil victory." This was a prelude to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville the following August. We all know how that event ended in tragedy. But even if it had not, we must not forget that the lead-in to the violence was a march of torch-wielding neo-Nazis and assorted other activists chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Think about what that means. The canard that Jews are out to replace the so-called true members of Western society, meaning white Christians, is a stable trope of modern anti-Semitism. It was a central theme of Nazism. The mass murderers of Jews justified their actions by saying that they were defending Western civilization from Jewish attack. That is the bottom-level meaning of the phrase, "Jews will not replace us." Surely we remember that the White House responded to the Charlottesville mayhem with not one but 3 statements on successive days, alternately criticizing the anti-Semitism of the Charlottesville neo-Nazis, and half defending them by pointedly spreading the blame for the disturbances. And indeed, there were violent people among the Antifa activists gathered there. But what we might not all know is how the right-wing anti-Semites responded to that clustering of messages. I researched it at the time with a mixture of foreboding and frightened fascination. The dominant message on alt-right message boards was, if we are all criticized, we have won. Indeed, that analysis, sadly, proved to be correct. Between 2017 and the present, anti-Semitic attacks in the United States have increased. The Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith organization tracks cases of physical assault, harassment, and vandalism against Jews. In 2018, it reported 1,879 incidents. In 2019, it reported a 12% increase to 2,107, the highest annual tally since the group began keeping records in 1979. There are multiple sources of anti-Semitic violence. There is an anti-Semitic aspect to attacks on Jews from progressive circles, thinly disguised as anti-Zionism, but in fact going far beyond the legitimate criticism of the State of Israel's policies. There's also the unchanged anti-Semitism from segments of the Arab world and from American outliers, such as the Nation of Islam. But a significant factor in the rise of anti-Jewish violence is what the Anti-Defamation League chief, Jonathan Greenblatt, called the normalization of anti-Semitic tropes. What used to be whispered is now proclaimed loudly. It is as if the Ku Klux Klan were to decide to march without their masks, because they've lost both shame and fear. They're not ashamed of their bigotry, and they do not fear social ostracism. So it is sadly not surprising that in 2020, the tumultuous events of the year also served as grist for the neo-Nazi mill. Widespread unemployment, caused both by COVID-19 and by the protective governmental measures issued in response to the pandemic, has provided a fertile soil for the poisonous weed of conspiracy theories to grow. Among the rioters who defiled the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of this year were white power and Nazi-admiring extremists, among whom these conspiracy theories are accepted as gospel truth. If people can believe a publicity-seeking freshman congresswoman when she pushes an absurd charge of Jews using space lasers to start California forest fires, which will then somehow redound to the Jewish financial advantage, that shows us how persistent is the anti-Semitic canard of the unscrupulous Jewish businessman. That charge predated the Nazis, but they used it to the fullest. When I was young, I thought naively that ceremonies such as our annual Holocaust commemoration would become less necessary over time. But now I know that I was wrong. Calling out anti-Semitism is more urgent today than it was 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. 20 years ago, we were engaged in an internal Jewish debate about whether the meaning of our Holocaust remembrance was primarily about coming to the aid of Bosnian Muslims who were suffering attacks from Serbs in the post-Cold War breakup of Yugoslavia. Today, I hope we are clear that the expression "never again" has both a core and a periphery. At its periphery, its meaning extends to helping others facing bigotry-born violence. Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs persecuted in China, Asians, Latinos, and African Americans targeted in America, Christians living in terror in fundamentalist Muslim territories. But this extension of meaning never supplants the most basic meaning of the term "never again," that Jews may never again be targeted with the permission or the indifference of the world. The time to defend ourselves is now.